This video is going to walk through my solutions to the statistical study practice. Some of the problems I might not write out the full answers. I'm just going to sort of talk through them. If you want to see the written out solutions, please take a look at the written out key on Canvas. All right, so in this particular problem, we're using all the data from this teens and social media study, and it was on the second page of the practice, and so I have it open sort of next door, and you were given 3 different data displays and then some of the information about the sample. And so we were told, sort of this intro to the article, today's teens are navigating a digital landscape unlike one experienced by their predecessors, particularly when it comes to persuasive presence of social media. And so in 2022, the Pew Research Center fielded an in-depth survey asking American teens and their parents about their experiences with and views towards social media. And then the key findings were sort of summarized in an article. So state the research goal, what was hoped to be learned. It's right there sort of underlined in the article. They're trying to learn more about the experiences and viewpoints towards social media that both teens and their parents have. So, let's turn on my marker. So, learn about experiences and views towards social media that parents and teens have. So the population then is basically teenagers and their parents. And their parents. Now, we can give a specific sample here, and that's where we're going to sort of look over on our document here. We can see, okay, well, we have teens ages 13 through 17, and there's 1,316 of them surveyed. So 1,316 teens ages 13 to 17. And then down below, it says the parents of those teenagers, same number. So 1,316 parents of teens. All right, state a sample statistic that goes with the headline. A majority of teens, so that's probably a keyword. I'm going to highlight that. So a majority of teens feel that as if they have little to no control over their data being collected by social media companies. All right, so let's look at our diagrams over here. So the top 2 deal with teenagers because I can sort of see the percent of U.S. teens versus the bottom one says the percent of U.S. parents. So I'm going to be using one of these. And in fact, it's the headline right here. A majority of teens feel they have little to no control over their data being used. So if we're focused on sort of reading what's the sample statistic that led to this, that would be, clearly that 14 goes with people who felt they had a lot of control. 40 goes with a little, but notice we're looking for a little to no. So we actually want 2 categories. We have a little and then no control at 20. So we actually want the 20% plus the 40% for a total of 60%. The next question is asking, what is the confidence interval for that sample statistic? So let's go back up to our thing, and this is U.S. teens in general. So we're going to use that top margin of error. So our margin of error is plus or minus 3.2%. And so we would have 60 minus 3.2 and 60 plus 3.2. And so we'd have a low value of 56.8, so about over half. So this is where the majority came from. No matter what, the low end of this interval is saying probably at least 56% of teens out there say they have little to no control. 2, and then the highest end is 63.2%. So that's where they get the word saying, that's where they feel comfortable saying majority. is because even when we factor in that margin of error, we're still looking at over half of the data. And that's why, you know, that margin of error starts to matter, and sort of where does those headlines come from, and that's sort of what we're thinking. All right, state the meaning of the confidence interval for the sample statistic we just found, aka describe the population parameter. So with all of these, we state, okay, with a 95% confidence. And if you look at some of the print, they'll, like on this, like you open the article and look at the data, they tell you with 95% confidence between 56.8% and 63.2% of U.S. teens ages 13 to 17 feel that they have little to no control, and I'm going to just dot this, little to no control over their data being collected by social media companies. So we're sort of putting a bunch of the last few ones together. All right, next one. What are the 2 sample statistics that lead to the headline, but only 1 in 5 are extremely or very concerned about the amount of information these sites have about them? So that's coming from the very next bar graph. And if you notice, so this is, or not bar graph, pie chart. Let's refer to the data display correctly. These are all percentages. And notice that we have, if we look in the extremely category, extremely concerned, there's 8% of the population. And then if we go into the very concerned, we have 13%. It's that light blue. And put together, that's about 21%. And 21% is about 1/5. 20% would actually be 1/5. So it's a little more than 1/5. But that's where they get the 1 in 5 are extremely or very concerned about the amount of information. You know, which doesn't seem to agree. You know, that basically says, you know, even though they know they have no control, they're not really worried about it. So how many of the surveyed parents, so we're going to try and transition our percentages from our study back into numbers, are extremely worried about their teens being distracted from completing homework on completing homework by social media? So we want to go to this bottom chart. We're focused on parents and are extremely worried, so that the dark blue, and then being distracted from homework is the 3rd row down, and so I see that it's 38% of the total parents surveyed. Well, of the 1,316 parents we surveyed. So that would just be 0.38 times the 1,316, which rounds to about 500 parents. A sizable number. Okay, moving along to the next side. So for the sample statistic, we're looking at parents, and we want to find the sample statistic of the people who are somewhat worried. So we're going to be looking at that gray middle bar, that their teen's use of social media could lead to their teen wasting too much time on these sites. So wasting too much time is the 2nd row down, and notice that's 28%. Extremely worried that their teen's use of social media could lead their teen to being harassed or bullied. So extremely worried again is the blue, and bullied is 3 up from the bottom, so that's 29%. And so then we want to come up with our sample or our confidence interval given those sample statistics. Now this time our margin of error is going to be different. So if we go back and we look, the parent group has a slightly smaller margin of error. It's 3.1%. And so if I'm thinking that 28, I have 28 minus 3.1% and 28 plus 3.1% to get a range between 24.9% and 31.1%. Same idea with the 29. We would repeat this process once you get the hang of it, you're like, oh, this isn't too bad. Oops, but I need to make sure I use the right numbers. And so this range would be between 25.9% and 32.1%. All right, which group had a margin of error considered within the acceptable range? And so remember, acceptable range sort of means, we want a total range of less than 8, preferably, which would mean that the, half amount, the plus or minus, would be plus or minus 4 or less. Well, if I go and I look at these margins of error, all of them are pretty high. The only ones that are under 4 are the overall teen one and the overall parent one, which is why when you actually look at this article, you'll notice that most of the conclusions go for the whole group and they don't break it up much by subgroups. However, while I do think that the teens and the parents are the ones that I can reliably make some generalizations about, a margin of error of 4.1 is pretty darn close. I would say that one's probably okay. So that's the ages 15 to 17. Also, along with that, over, we're, for the 4.2, those are all in the sort of wiggle room of probably okay. They're not great, but they're okay. And sometimes as a statistician or, making conclusions about things, you're just going to have to be okay with okay. On the other hand, there are ones that I definitely wouldn't want to make conclusions about. So if I take a look and I see that 9.2% margin of error, that would be a range of over 18%. And so I probably don't want to make any generalizations about specifically Black race and ethnicity. Similar to that making less than 30,000 has an 8.1% margin of error. That's really big. Both of those have huge margins of error. And it even comments like, they didn't do a great job waiting for, race in this survey. So probably shouldn't be making any generalizations with race nor household income would be sort of my conclusion I would make from that. Both of those are areas where that margin of error created a little too big of a range for me to be comfortable with. So hopefully this gives you a sense of how we can, read some data displays, sort of apply our margins of error, think about conclusions, think about, what are good topics to make conclusions about. And we will keep looking at some more statistical studies in class.